He also claimed that Artemisia and her father had an incestuous relationship, and that Artemisia, her dead mother, her sisters, and her aunts were all a bunch of whores and operated out of the Gentileschi household. What's going on, guys? Welcome to today's video. My name's Brandon and this is Mod Art. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the Italian Baroque artist, Artemisia Gentileschi. She was an Italian painter born in Rome on July 8, 1593. She was the eldest child and only daughter of Orazio Gentileschi and Prudentia Montone, who passed away when Artemisia was 12. She studied under her father and his friend, Agostino Tassi. Her first completed work was at the age of 17 and was Susanna and the Elders. This story comes from Daniel 13, which is in the Catholic Bible. It's about a pious woman named Susanna who was being creeped on by these two men who are referred to as the Elders. The Elders basically told her that they wanted to sleep with her, and she was chaste and pious and committed to God, and she said no. So the Elders gave her an ultimatum. You either let us do what we came here to do, or we're going to tell everybody that we saw you having sex with your lover under a tree. And she was essentially like, yep, you guys are going to do what you're going to do, but I'm not, doing that with you guys. The Elders stood on what they said, and they ended up accusing Susanna of fornicating with her lover under a tree. The Elders were believed, and Susanna was sentenced to death. She accepted her fate, though, and was waiting to meet her maker. Daniel, though, a prophet of God, did not believe them. So he asked them individually, what tree did you see Susanna sleeping with her lover under? They both gave different answers, and that's what Daniel used to prove her innocence. In 1611, Artemisia was sexually assaulted by the man she was studying under, Tassi. Here's some background information about the trial. It's not known what led to Artemisia's father finding out about her engagement with Tassi, but it's believed that he heard rumors and confronted them both. Another man who'd helped facilitate Artemisia's assault, named Cosimo Corli, was also charged. Cosimo had also attempted to rape her in the past and stole one of her paintings. According to court transcripts, Artemisia had an older friend named Tuzia who helped facilitate her assault by allowing Agostino into Artemisia's house through her apartment. Artemisia attempted to fight off her attacker and even cried out for Tuzia, but her cries were ignored. Tassi was already a convicted rapist, having assaulted his sister-in-law. It was also believed that he killed his wife, who had been missing at the time. Despite the assault, Tassi and Artemisia continued to have a sexual relationship. This was with the understanding that Tassi was going to marry her. This was because in the 17th century in Italy, sexual assault was more seen as a crime against the family's honor, not necessarily a vicious act towards an individual. And in order to regain the family's honor and the honor of the woman in question, she had to marry her attacker. This would usually result in criminal charges being dropped against the man and the woman regaining her lost honor. Otherwise, she would be shunned as a shameless woman. This law was repealed in 1981. The trial took place over 7 months, and Artemisia was tortured using a sibyl and thumb screws. The sibyl involved having a rope tied in between her fingers, and it was connected to a vise. The vise was tightened, and the rope would eventually cut into Artemisia's fingers. The thumb screws were a medieval torture device that you would clamp on to someone's big toes or thumbs and then twist the vise, leading to their thumbs or big toes being crushed. Sometimes these torture devices had sharp points in them so that the device would pierce into your nail beds, as well as crushing your fingers or toes. She had to have a vaginal exam in the middle of the courtroom to assess whether she was still a virgin or not. According to a witness in Artemisia's defense, Cosimo held a grudge against her because he rejected her in the past, and he wanted to get back at her through Tassi by letting him know whenever her father wasn't around. Tassi was making such blatantly false statements that even the judge called him out multiple times for lying. Some of his major claims were that Artemisia, who did not know how to write at the time, wrote a whole bunch of erotic letters to different men. He also claimed that Artemisia and her father had an incestuous relationship, and that Artemisia, her dead mother, her sisters, and her aunts were all a bunch of whores and operated out of the Gentileschi household. He even claimed that Orazio Gentileschi sold his daughter off once for a loaf of bread. Tassi was eventually found guilty of his crimes, was kept in jail for an additional 8 months after the trial, and was eventually exiled from Rome. but due to his connections, his exile wasn't really enforced and he was back in a couple of months. Not too long after the trial, she married Pier Antonio di Vincenzo Stiatesi. He was a Florentine nobleman and artist, and the next year they were off to his hometown. Artemisia was associated with the Medici court and painted an allegory of inclination for a series of frescoes painted to honor Michelangelo's life in the Casa Buonarroti. This is one of the paintings done to personify a trait that he embodied, which is his predisposition to artistic creation. It was a full female nude, but in 1680, one of the descendants of Michelangelo the Younger, Leonardo Buonarroti, had an artist named Volterrano come and paint drapes over the nude figure in order to have more decorum. In 1616, she was the first woman to join Florence's Academy of the Arts of Drawing. She had 5 children, all of whom died except for her daughter Prudentia, who lived into adulthood. Most female artists of her time only did still lifes and portraits. She focused on historical ones. Some of her most famous paintings come from the story of Judith in the Bible, who saves her city of Bethulia by beheading the Assyrian general Holofernes. The painting was thought of as crude because of the theatricality of the scene, but this wasn't uncommon for a lot of work created in the Baroque period. It's also believed that the depiction of the women may have been too unladylike. She lived in Venice for a while, then moved to Naples in around 1630. In 1638, she went to London to visit her father, who by that time had become the court painter for King Charles I and Queen Henrietta Maria. She and her father are believed to have collaborated on the ceiling painting in the Queen's house in Greenwich, known as an allegory of peace and the arts. Her father passed in 1639. She stayed in London for a little while longer and even surpassed her father in popularity. Somewhere around 1641, she moved back to Naples. This was around the time the English Civil War kicked off. While back in Naples, she did a lot of different versions of the story of David and Bathsheba. There's not a lot of information about her death, but she's believed to have died in 1656 when the plague decimated Naples. While doing my research for Artemisia, I read a lot of articles and I saw how one common criticism about her biography is the fact that they look at her and her work through the lens of being an assault survivor and not focus on her as an artist. And I can see a lot of truth in that criticism, because even through my own research, that pretty much tends to be the focal point of what they talk about, and they usually imply that she's an early feminist. And you can see some of that in her work, but one thing I think is really important that people don't really notice or talk about is the fact that maybe the reason why she's said to be super successful is because of the fact that she made the women in her paintings active agents. If you compare her painting of Judith beheads Holofernes and maybe that of Caravaggio, for example, in Caravaggio's rendition, Judith is very young, skinny, slender, and she seems to be grossed out by the gruesomeness of the act that she's performing. Whereas in Artemisia's rendition, Judith is an older woman. She looks kind of like a working woman, and she seems to be a more active agent, and she's, very decisive in beheading Holofernes. So I think to a royal or a nobleman or a collector's eye in Europe, that would have been a breath of fresh air. That's why I think she was popular. Now for the final result. Thanks for watching. YouTube thinks you'll like this video. Till the next one.